The autumn sun cast long shadows across the glass facade of AmeriHome Realty's Dallas showroom, its gleaming surfaces reflecting a city that prided itself on progress while harboring secrets in its corporate corridors. Darnell Hayes stood on the sidewalk, adjusting his simple navy blazer, his fingers unconsciously touching the silver watch his late father had given him. The same man who'd cleaned office buildings for 40 years and never owned a home. This corner held memories. 16 years ago, a young man with dreams, a business degree, and his father's watch had stood in this exact spot, turned away because this wasn't his kind of place. Today, at 45, the founder and CEO of AmeriHome Realty had returned, not in the chauffeur-driven Bentley parked 3 blocks away, but on foot, dressed like any middle-class professional hoping to make the biggest purchase of his life. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to walk into his own company, where his portrait hung in the corporate boardroom upstairs, completely unrecognized by the very people whose paychecks bore his signature. "Excuse me, sir, are you sure you're in the right place?" The words hit him before he'd even reached the entrance, spoken by a young white sales associate whose name tag read Tyler. The man's eyes swept over Darnell's modest attire with barely concealed disdain. "The community housing office is about 6 blocks that way." Darnell's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm looking at properties in the 2 million range. This is AmeriHome Realty, correct?" He watched Tyler's expression shift from condescension to barely suppressed laughter, the kind that said everything about what this man thought a black man in a department store blazer could afford. "Oh," Tyler replied, his tone dripping with false politeness. "Of course, sir. Right this way." But as Darnell stepped through the threshold of his own empire, he caught the subtle hand signal Tyler made to someone inside, a gesture that would set in motion a chain of events that would shake this company to its very foundation. They had no idea that in exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes, an emergency board meeting would begin that would change everything. The showroom buzzed with the quiet efficiency of high-end real estate, all marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Dallas's skyline. Darnell moved through the space with deliberate calm, his trained eye taking in every detail while his heart hammered against his ribs. This was more than a test. This was validation of every suspicion that had kept him awake at night, wondering if the company he'd built from nothing had grown into something that would have rejected his younger self. Jessica Manning, the receptionist, glanced up from her computer screen as Tyler approached her desk, whispering something that made her eyes dart toward Darnell with newfound attention. She picked up her phone, and within moments, a tall figure emerged from the glass-walled offices that lined the showroom's perimeter. Brad Thompson, the sales manager whose quarterly reports Darnell reviewed every month, strode across the marble floor with the confident swagger of a man who'd never been told no. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit impeccably tailored, and his smile held all the warmth of a corporate handbook. "Good afternoon," he said, extending a hand that lingered just a moment too long in the handshake, as if testing Darnell's grip, his worthiness. "I understand you're interested in some of our premium properties." "That's right," Darnell replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built a real estate empire. "I'm particularly interested in the penthouse units, something in the 2 to 3 million range." He watched Brad's face carefully, noting the micro-expression that flickered across his features, surprise, skepticism, and something else that looked uncomfortably like amusement. "Wonderful," Brad said, though his tone suggested anything but wonder. "Let me show you some options that might be more suitable for your budget range." He gestured toward a section of the showroom that Darnell knew displayed their mid-tier properties, the kind of homes that successful middle managers might aspire to own. "Actually," Darnell interrupted gently, "I specifically mentioned the penthouse range. 2 to 3 million. He let the words hang in the air, watching as Brad's professional mask slipped just enough to reveal the calculation happening behind his eyes. Brad's laugh was the sound of someone trying to diffuse what they perceived as an embarrassing mistake. Of course. It's just that those properties require some significant financial qualifications. Perhaps we should start with understanding your financing situation. The question carried weight beyond its words, a challenge disguised as procedure. Around them, other sales associates had begun to take notice. Darnell caught snippets of whispered conversations, saw the sidelong glances that followed him as he moved through the space. A well-dressed white couple was simultaneously being shown luxury properties by another agent, their financial qualifications apparently assumed rather than questioned. "I'll be paying cash," Darnell said simply, watching Brad's eyebrows rise. "Would you like to see proof of funds?" He reached into his jacket pocket, feeling the weight of the bank statement that showed liquid assets exceeding $8 million, money that had been earned through the very company that was now treating him like a potential threat. Brad's professional smile widened, but his eyes remained calculating. "That's impressive. But you understand, we have procedures. Corporate policy requires extensive verification for transactions of this magnitude." He paused, letting his gaze travel over Darnell's simple blazer and khakis. "Especially for certain types of unique situations." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Darnell felt the familiar burn of racism dressed up as policy, the kind that had followed him through business school, through his first job interviews, through every milestone of success that should have placed him above such treatment. But he remained perfectly still, his expression neutral, even as his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Board meeting prep complete, legal standing by." "I understand procedures," Darnell replied, his voice carrying just enough edge to suggest this wasn't his first encounter with such unique situations. "Perhaps you could explain exactly what makes my situation unique." The question hung in the air between them, a challenge wrapped in genuine curiosity. Brad's discomfort was becoming visible now, but he pressed forward with the kind of determination that suggested he'd navigated similar conversations before. "Well, we just want to ensure all our clients are properly qualified. It's nothing personal, you understand? Just standard protocol for high-value transactions." "Standard protocol," Darnell repeated, his gaze shifting to where the white couple was being handed keys for a test drive of a property viewing, their standard protocol apparently consisting of a friendly conversation and a handshake. "I see." He pulled out his phone, seemingly to check the time, but actually to activate the voice recording app he'd learned to keep ready for situations exactly like this. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson," Darnell said, reading the name from the silver plate on Brad's jacket. "What exactly is your standard protocol for verifying cash purchases?" He watched the sales manager's face, knowing that in the corporate training materials he'd personally approved, there was no such requirement for additional verification of liquid funds from qualified buyers. The trap was being set, brick by brick, and Brad Thompson was laying the foundation himself. The atmosphere in the showroom had shifted subtly, like the moment before a storm when the air grows thick with anticipation. Other staff members had begun to orbit their conversation, drawn by some invisible signal that suggested drama was brewing. Darnell noted each face, recognizing some from employee files he'd reviewed, others completely unknown despite their clear seniority in his organization. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office," Brad suggested, gesturing toward a glass-enclosed space that offered privacy while remaining visible to the entire showroom. It was the kind of suggestion that could be interpreted as courtesy or isolation, depending on one's perspective. "Of course," Darnell agreed, following Brad across the marble floor while maintaining the calm demeanor that had served him through decades of business negotiations. As they walked, he caught a glimpse of Tyler speaking urgently into a phone, his voice too low to hear, but his agitation clear. The office was a testament to corporate success. Leather chairs, a mahogany desk, walls lined with awards and photographs of Brad shaking hands with various dignitaries and clients. All white dignitaries and clients, Darnell noted with interest. "Please, have a seat," Brad said, settling behind his desk with the air of a man reclaiming his territory. "Now, about those financial qualifications." He opened a thick folder, extracting what appeared to be a standard form. "We'll need to verify your income, employment history, and the source of your funds." Darnell remained standing, studying the photographs on the wall. "The source of my funds?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "That's an interesting requirement. Is that standard for all cash purchases, or just for certain customers?" Brad's pen paused over the form. It's corporate policy for transactions of this magnitude. We have to be careful about money laundering, you understand? Due diligence." "Absolutely," Darnell replied, turning to face Brad directly. "Money laundering is a serious concern. I assume you've required similar documentation from all your high-value cash buyers this quarter?" He gestured toward a wall of photos, showing Brad with various clients at property closings, many of whom Darnell knew from the company's internal records had made similar cash purchases. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Brad's professional mask was beginning to crack around the edges, revealing the discomfort underneath. "Well, each situation is unique," he said finally. "Some clients have established relationships with the company, existing financial histories." "I see," Darnell said, settling into the leather chair across from Brad's desk. "And what about clients like myself? What additional steps do we need to take to establish our credibility?" The word carried just enough emphasis to make its subtext clear. Outside the glass office, Darnell could see more staff members gathering, their conversations hushed, but their attention focused in his direction. Jessica had been joined at her desk by another woman, Susan Martinez, according to the nameplate Darnell could just make out. The regional director, whose quarterly reviews he'd been reading for 3 years. "Well," Brad began, consulting his form as if it held answers to questions he didn't want to ask directly. "We'll need comprehensive income verification. Tax returns for the past 5 years, employer verification, bank statements going back at least 12 months. He looked up, meeting Darnell's steady gaze. "And of course, we'll need to understand exactly how you accumulated this level of liquid assets." The implication was clear, hanging in the air between them like an accusation wrapped in corporate speak. Darnell had encountered this before, the assumption that a black man with significant wealth must have acquired it through questionable means. The unspoken question, "What are you really doing here?" "That's quite a comprehensive list," Darnell observed, pulling out his phone to make a note. The movement was deliberate, ensuring Brad could see the expensive device, the tailored suit jacket, the quiet indicators of success that should have shifted this conversation from the beginning. "Just to clarify, this is standard procedure for all cash purchases above $2 million? Brad's hesitation was answer enough, but he pressed forward anyway. "These are unusual circumstances," he said, his voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. "A walk-in client, no existing relationship with the company, requesting to view our most exclusive properties." He shrugged as if the conclusion was obvious. "Unusual circumstances?" Darnell repeated, his tone thoughtful. "I'm curious. When that couple out there requested to view properties, did they go through this same verification process?" He gestured toward the showroom, where the white couple was now examining property brochures with their sales agent. Brad's face flushed slightly. "That's different. They're referrals from existing clients, established members of the community." Established members of the community. Darnell echoed, the phrase settling between them with uncomfortable weight. And how exactly does one establish community membership? Is there an application process? Specific qualifications? The questions were delivered with the precision of a cross-examination, each one designed to expose the framework of assumptions that governed Brad's world. Darnell watched the sales manager squirm, recognizing the moment when professional courtesy began to crack under the pressure of revealed prejudice. "Look," Brad said, setting down his pen with more force than necessary. "I don't think you understand the caliber of properties we're discussing here. These aren't just houses, they're investments, lifestyle statements. The people who buy these homes are typically—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't land him in legal trouble. "Typically what?" Darnell asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to getting answers to difficult questions. Brad's silence stretched long enough to become an answer itself. Outside the office, Susan Martinez was approaching the glass door, her expression suggesting she'd been summoned to deal with what was clearly becoming a situation. The door opened with a soft knock, and Susan stepped into the office with the practiced smile of a professional troubleshooter. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, though her tone suggested she had no intention of leaving. "I'm Susan Martinez, Regional Director. I understand we're discussing some of our premium properties." Darnell rose to shake her hand, noting the way her eyes performed the same rapid assessment that Brad's had earlier, taking in his appearance, his demeanor, his apparent net worth. "Darnell Hayes," he said simply. "I was just learning about your verification procedures for cash purchases." Susan's smile remained perfectly in place, but her eyes sharpened with interest. "Verification procedures, yes. We take our due diligence very seriously here at AmeriHome." She glanced at Brad, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps we could start with some basic information. Your current residence, occupation, general financial background." The interrogation was shifting into a higher gear, and Darnell recognized the tactical change. Where Brad had been clumsy in his prejudice, Susan was surgical, professional enough to avoid obvious discrimination while still achieving the same goal. "I'm in real estate," Darnell said, settling back into his chair as Susan took the remaining seat. "Development and investment, primarily in the Southwest markets." It was true, if incomplete. He was in real estate the same way that Henry Ford had been in transportation. "Real estate," Susan repeated, making a note on her tablet. "That's interesting. Development can be quite lucrative, but it's also fairly volatile. What kind of projects do you focus on?" Her tone suggested she was already categorizing him. Small-time flipper, perhaps, or someone who'd gotten lucky on a few deals. "Mixed-use developments, primarily," Darnell replied. "Some residential, some commercial. Portfolio diversification across multiple markets." He watched her make notes, recognizing the pattern of questions designed to establish his legitimacy while simultaneously undermining it. "And you're looking to purchase in Dallas as an investment property?" Susan asked, "Or would this be a primary residence?" "Primary residence," Darnell said. "I'm expanding my operations into the Dallas market. It seemed appropriate to establish roots in the community." The irony of the statement wasn't lost on him. He was already more rooted in this community than anyone in this room realized. Susan and Brad exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "Expanding operations," Susan mused. "That's ambitious. The Dallas market can be quite competitive, especially for newcomers." The word carried weight beyond its literal meaning. "I'm sure it can be," Darnell agreed. "Though I've found that quality work and professional relationships tend to overcome most barriers." He paused, letting his gaze move between the two of them. "In my experience, the real estate industry rewards merit and results, regardless of background." It was a direct challenge, spoken in the language of corporate values that both of them would claim to embrace. Susan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course," she said. "Merit and results are what we value most at a Mary home, which is why we're so thorough in our client qualification process. We want to ensure that every transaction reflects well on both our clients and our company reputation." The words were carefully chosen, technically defensible, but their meaning was clear. Darnell represented a potential risk to their company reputation, not because of his financial capacity or professional credentials, but because of something else entirely. "Company reputation," Darnell repeated thoughtfully. "That's certainly important. I'd hate for my purchase to somehow reflect poorly on a Mary home's reputation." He pulled out his phone again, ostensibly to check the time, but actually to send a quick text. "Legal team on standby. Escalation imminent." The response came immediately. "All departments ready. Documentation complete." Darnell slipped the phone back into his pocket and settled more comfortably in his chair. "So, shall we discuss the specific properties I'm interested in viewing? I have a particular appreciation for architectural innovation and community impact, the kind of developments that really define a company's vision and values." It was time to see just how far they were willing to go. The tension in the room had become palpable, thick enough that even Brad seemed to recognize they were approaching dangerous territory. But Susan Martinez had not become regional director by backing down from difficult conversations. If anything, the challenge seemed to energize her. "Before we move to property viewings," she said, her tone taking on the measured cadence of someone delivering practiced corporate speak, "we really do need to complete our preliminary assessment. You're looking at premium properties, which triggers additional protocols." Darnell nodded encouragingly. "What specific protocols?" Susan consulted her tablet. "Financial documentation, income verification, and character references from industry professionals." She looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Standard procedure for high-risk transactions." "Character references," Darnell repeated, his eyebrows rising slightly. "That's interesting. Is that standard for all high-value purchases, or it's standard for transactions that might present unusual risk factors?" Susan replied smoothly. "Given your background and the fact that you're new to the Dallas market, we want to ensure proper due diligence." The euphemisms were piling up now. Unusual risk factors, background, proper due diligence. Each phrase was carefully chosen to be legally defensible while carrying unmistakable subtext. Darnell felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had driven him to build his empire in the first place, but he kept his expression neutral. "My background," he said quietly. "Could you be more specific about what aspects of my background present risk factors?" Brad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, apparently recognizing that Susan was venturing into territory that could become legally problematic. But Susan pressed forward with the confidence of someone who'd navigated similar conversations many times before. "Well, you have to understand our position," she said, leaning forward slightly. "We're responsible to our other clients, to the community, to maintain certain standards. When someone walks in off the street claiming to have millions in cash, especially someone without established community ties or recognizable credentials." She shrugged, as if the implication was obvious. "Recognizable credentials," Darnell echoed. "What would constitute recognizable credentials in your assessment?" Susan's smile became strained. "Professional references from established firms, membership in relevant industry associations, documented transaction history with reputable institutions." She paused, studying his face. "The kind of professional network that typically comes with legitimate success in this industry." The word legitimate hung in the air like an accusation. Darnell felt his phone buzz, another message from his assistant, probably asking for guidance on the board meeting preparations. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it carefully on Brad's desk. The card was simple, elegant, just his name, title, and contact information. But the AmeriHome Realty logo was clearly visible in the corner, along with the corporate address that matched the building they were sitting in. Both Susan and Brad stared at the card for a long moment, their expressions shifting from confusion to calculation. Susan picked it up, examining it closely. Darnell Hayes. She read aloud. Chief Executive Officer. She looked up at him, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. Is this some kind of joke? I don't typically joke about business cards. Darnell replied calmly. Though I am curious about your assessment of its legitimacy. Does it meet your standards for recognizable credentials? Brad had gone pale, his eyes darting between the business card and Darnell's face, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. This can't be real, he stammered. The CEO of AmeriHome is what? Darnell asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Please, complete that thought. Susan had regained her composure, though her hands were trembling slightly as she held the business card. Anyone can print business cards, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. This proves nothing. If you're really claiming to be the CEO of this company, then you'll have no problem providing additional verification. Darnell smiled, and for the first time since entering the building, it was genuinely amused. Additional verification? Of course. What would you suggest? Perhaps we could call the corporate office, speak to someone in legal or human resources. The suggestion clearly made both of them uncomfortable, but Susan was committed to her position now. Fine, she said, reaching for the phone on Brad's desk. Let's call corporate and clear this up right now. Excellent idea, Darnell agreed, pulling out his own phone. I'll just let them know to expect your call. He typed a quick message. Dallas team about to call corporate for CEO verification. All hands ready? The response was immediate. Legal, HR, and executive team standing by. This should be interesting. Darnell looked up to find both Susan and Brad staring at him, their uncertainty now clearly visible despite their attempts to maintain professional composure. Outside the glass office, he could see that more staff members had gathered, drawn by the obvious tension radiating from their meeting. Before you make that call, Darnell said, his voice taking on the quiet authority that had commanded boardrooms across the country. I want you both to understand something. This conversation, every word of it, has been documented. Your verification procedures, your assessment of my background, your concerns about community standards, all of it. Susan's face had gone white. Are you recording us? I'm protecting myself, Darnell replied simply. Which, given this conversation, seems like a necessary precaution. He stood, straightening his jacket. Now, shall we make that call to corporate? I'm quite interested to hear how they respond when you explain the situation. The trap had been set, and they had walked into it willingly. But Darnell felt no satisfaction, only the familiar weight of disappointment that came with having his worst suspicions confirmed. His own company, built from nothing and designed to create opportunities for everyone, had become exactly the kind of institution that would have rejected his younger self. It was time to change that, starting now. Susan Martinez stared at the business card in her hand as if it might transform into something else entirely if she looked at it long enough. The silence in the office had stretched beyond uncomfortable into something approaching surreal, broken only by the muted sounds of the showroom beyond the glass walls. This is impossible, Brad finally whispered, his voice barely audible. The CEO of AmeriHome, he's not what? Darnell asked, his tone deadly quiet. Please, Brad, finish that sentence. Tell me exactly what the CEO of AmeriHome isn't. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Susan had regained some of her composure, but her professional mask was cracking at the edges. Look, even if this is real, which I'm not saying it is, you have to understand our position. We were just following standard procedures. Standard procedures, Darnell repeated, his voice carrying the accumulated weight of decades of such encounters. Let me ask you something, Susan. In your 3 years as regional director, how many white clients have you subjected to these standard procedures? How many have been asked to provide character references and detailed explanations of how they accumulated their wealth? Susan's silence was answer enough, but Darnell wasn't finished. How many have been questioned about their background, their community ties, their legitimacy? He stepped closer to Brad's desk, his presence filling the small office. How many have been treated like potential criminals for having the audacity to walk into your showroom with cash in hand? The questions hit their targets with surgical precision, each one designed to expose the framework of assumptions that had governed this entire interaction. Through the glass walls, Darnell could see that their confrontation had drawn an audience, staff members, other clients, even some security personnel who'd been summoned by someone's growing unease. We treat all our clients with respect, Brad managed, his voice shaking. We don't discriminate based on what? Darnell demanded. Race? Economic background? The cut of someone's suit or the color of their skin? He pulled out his phone, checking the time with deliberate emphasis. In exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes, I have an emergency board meeting scheduled. Would you like to guess what the primary agenda item will be? Susan had gone completely pale now, the implications hitting her with devastating clarity. Mr. Hayes, if you really are who you claim to be, then surely you understand that we were just being cautious. Due diligence is important in any business. Due diligence. Darnell laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call it when you assume a black man with money must be a criminal? When you subject him to interrogation procedures that you'd never dream of applying to your white clients? The accusation hung in the air between them, no longer dressed up in corporate euphemisms or professional courtesy. This was the moment of truth, when the comfortable fiction of colorblind business practices collided with the harsh reality of systematic discrimination. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Susan said desperately, reaching for her phone. Let me call corporate and we can clear this up immediately. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. By all means. Darnell agreed, gesturing toward the phone. Call corporate, ask for the CEO's office. Tell them you have Darnell Hayes here, and you need verification of his identity. He paused, his smile turning predatory. And while you're at it, why don't you explain exactly why you needed that verification? Susan's hand hovered over the phone, trapped between her need to verify what seemed impossible and her growing terror that it might actually be true. Around them, the showroom had gone quiet, conversation stopping as the drama in the glass office drew every eye. What's happening here? A new voice cut through the tension as Tyler, the young sales associate who'd first challenged Darnell, appeared in the doorway. Behind him stood 2 security guards, their presence sending a clear message about how the situation was being perceived. Tyler, Susan said, her voice strained. This gentleman claims to be the CEO of a Merry Home Realty. Tyler's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Right, and I'm the King of England. He gestured to the security guards. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. You're causing a disturbance. Darnell looked at the young man, Tyler, whose employment file he'd reviewed just 6 months ago, whose sales numbers had been consistently below average, whose attitude had been noted as problematic by multiple supervisors. A disturbance, he repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose I am. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the one he wanted. The number rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "This is Jennifer Walsh, a Merry Home Legal." "Jennifer, this is Darnell. I'm at the Dallas showroom and we have a situation that requires immediate intervention." Even through the phone's speaker, Jennifer's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Mr. Hayes, what kind of situation?" "The kind that's about to become a federal discrimination case unless we address it immediately." Darnell replied, his eyes never leaving the faces of the people arrayed before him. "I need you to conference in Marcus from HR and David from Corporate Security. Now." The phone went silent for a moment. Then Jennifer's voice returned, crisp and professional. "Conferencing them in now, sir. Stand by." Within seconds, 2 more voices joined the call. "This is Marcus Henderson, Human Resources. David Kim, Corporate Security." "Gentlemen," Darnell said, his voice carrying across the small office. "I'm currently at our Dallas location, where I've been subjected to discriminatory treatment by our own staff. I need immediate documentation of this incident and preparation for potential legal action." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Then Marcus's voice, carefully controlled. "Sir, can you provide details about the nature of the discriminatory treatment?" "I walked into our showroom as an unidentified black customer interested in purchasing a $2 to $3 million property with cash," Darnell explained, his eyes fixed on Susan's increasingly horrified face. "I was immediately subjected to additional verification procedures, financial interrogation, and requests for character references that, according to the staff here, are standard for people with my background and unusual circumstances." "Jesus Christ," David Kim muttered, apparently forgetting the phone was on speaker. "Furthermore," Darnell continued, "when I attempted to provide identification, staff members questioned its legitimacy and suggested I was attempting some kind of fraud. The situation has now escalated to the point where security has been called to remove me from the premises." Marcus Henderson's voice when he spoke again was tight with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Hayes, I want to assure you that this behavior is completely contrary to company policy and values. We will conduct a full investigation immediately." "The investigation can wait," Darnell replied. "Right now, I want every person involved in this incident to understand exactly who they've been treating like a criminal." He looked directly at Tyler, whose smirk had faded as the implications of the phone conversation sank in. "Sir," Jennifer Walsh's voice cut through the tension, "I'm initiating emergency protocols. All parties involved should consider this a formal legal proceeding from this point forward." Susan Martinez finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Hayes, if this is real, if you really are the CEO, then there's been a terrible mistake." "A mistake," Darnell repeated, his voice carrying 20 years of accumulated frustration. "That's an interesting way to characterize systematic discrimination. Tell me, Susan, was it also a mistake when you questioned my legitimacy? When you demanded character references? When you suggested that my wealth must have been acquired through questionable means?" Each question landed like a physical blow, and Susan visibly flinched with each one. Around them, the showroom had gone completely silent, every staff member and client frozen in place as they witnessed the unfolding drama. "I think," Darnell said, checking his phone again, "it's time we convened that board meeting early. Jennifer, are all department heads available for an emergency session?" "Standing by, sir. Shall I patch everyone in now?" Darnell smiled, and this time it was sharp enough to cut glass. "Please do. It's time the Dallas office understood exactly what kind of company they're really working for." The phone screen lit up with incoming connections, executives, lawyers, department heads, all joining a conference call that would reshape everything they thought they knew about their organization. And at the center of it all stood Darnell Hayes, no longer the humble customer seeking basic respect, but the CEO who was about to remind everyone why he'd built this company in the first place. The revolution was about to begin. The conference room screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of faces that represented the entire leadership structure of a Merry Home Realty. Jennifer Walsh appeared in the top left corner, her expression grim but focused. Marcus Henderson from HR looked like he was preparing for battle, while David Kim from security was already typing furiously on his laptop, documenting everything in real time. But it was the center square that commanded everyone's attention. The corporate boardroom, where 12 executives sat around a polished mahogany table, their faces ranging from confused to horrified as they absorbed the situation unfolding in Dallas. "Ladies and gentlemen," Darnell said, his voice carrying the authority that had built a billion-dollar empire. "Thank you for joining this emergency session. I'm calling this meeting to order from our Dallas showroom, where I've just experienced firsthand the kind of treatment our company apparently reserves for black customers." The silence was deafening. Through the glass walls of Brad's office, Darnell could see that the entire showroom had come to a standstill. Clients stood frozen mid-conversation, sales associates clustered in whispered groups, and the security guards Tyler had summoned looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized they might have just threatened the CEO of the company. "For those joining us remotely," Darnell continued, "please allow me to introduce the key players in today's demonstration of institutional racism." He gestured toward Susan, whose face had gone ashen. Susan Martinez, regional director, who determined that my background and unusual circumstances required additional verification procedures. Susan opened her mouth to speak, but Darnell continued before she could form words. "Brad Thompson, sales manager, who questioned the legitimacy of my funds and suggested that standard protocols required extensive documentation of how I'd accumulated my wealth." Brad had slumped in his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear entirely. "And Tyler Morrison, sales associate, who initially directed me away from the building entirely and just moments ago called security to have me removed for causing a disturbance." Tyler's cocky smirk had been replaced by an expression of dawning horror. Dr. Patricia Williams, a Merry Home's chief diversity officer, leaned forward on the screen. "Mr. Hayes, I want to state for the record that this behavior is completely contrary to every policy and value this company stands for. We will conduct a comprehensive investigation." "Patricia," Darnell interrupted gently, "the investigation is happening right now, in real time, with full documentation. What I want to discuss is what we're going to do about it." Marcus Henderson cleared his throat. "Sir, from an HR perspective, we're looking at clear violations of federal discrimination laws, company policy, and basic human decency. This situation requires immediate corrective action." "Immediate corrective action," Darnell repeated. "That's exactly what I had in mind." He turned to face the conference room camera directly. "Effective immediately, I'm implementing new protocols for every Merry Home location nationwide." The executives on screen leaned forward, recognizing that they were witnessing more than just the resolution of a single incident. This was a corporate transformation happening in real time. "First," Darnell announced, "we're instituting a mystery shopping program. Every month, diverse individuals will visit our locations as potential customers. Their experiences will be documented, recorded, and reviewed at the highest levels of this organization." Jennifer Walsh was typing furiously, converting his words into actionable policy in real time. "Legal implications are minimal," she called out. "This falls well within our operational authority." "Second," Darnell continued, "we're establishing mandatory bias training for every employee, from entry-level associates to regional directors. Not the standard corporate workshop that everyone sleeps through, but intensive, practical training that addresses real-world scenarios exactly like what happened here today." Dr. Williams nodded approvingly. "I can have a comprehensive curriculum designed within 2 weeks. We'll bring in external facilitators with specific expertise in real estate discrimination." "Third," Darnell said, his voice taking on the steel that had intimidated competitors across 3 decades, We're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Not progressive discipline, not second chances, zero tolerance. Anyone who treats our customers the way I was treated today will be immediately terminated." The words hit the Dallas team like physical blows. Susan had begun crying quietly, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. Brad looked like he was having trouble breathing. Tyler had gone completely white. "But perhaps most importantly," Darnell continued, "we're establishing a $50 million fund specifically for minority home ownership initiatives. Down payment assistance, credit counseling, financial literacy programs, everything necessary to ensure that the American dream is actually accessible to everyone, not just those who look like they belong in a country club." The executives on screen were nodding approvingly, but Darnell wasn't finished. "Now," he said, turning back to face the Dallas team, "let's discuss the immediate consequences for today's behavior." Marcus Henderson's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Hayes, based on what we've documented, I recommend immediate termination for any employee who directly participated in discriminatory behavior." "I concur," added David Kim from security. "We have clear evidence of policy violations that create legal liability for the company." Darnell studied the faces before him. Susan, who'd built her career on professional competence, but had revealed ugly prejudices underneath. Brad, whose casual racism had been dressed up as business acumen. Tyler, whose arrogance had masked deep-seated discrimination. "Susan Martinez," he said formally, "your employment with AmeriHome Realty is terminated immediately. Brad Thompson, same. Tyler Morrison, same." The words fell like hammer blows. Susan's quiet crying became audible sobs. Brad put his head in his hands. Tyler looked like he was about to argue, but the presence of the cameras and the full corporate leadership team seemed to finally penetrate his understanding. "Furthermore," Darnell continued, "I'm personally ensuring that your behavior today becomes part of your permanent employment record. Any future employer who calls for references will hear exactly how you treated customers who didn't fit your preconceptions about who belongs in luxury real estate." Jennifer Walsh spoke up from the screen. "Sir, we'll also be reporting this incident to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and relevant state agencies. This kind of discrimination can't go undocumented." "Security," Darnell called to the guards who were still standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Please escort these former employees from the building. They're no longer welcome on AmeriHome property." As the 3 terminated employees were led away, the remaining showroom staff stood in stunned silence. These were people who'd witnessed everything, who'd said nothing, who'd allowed discrimination to happen in their workplace without intervention. "For the rest of you," Darnell announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet showroom, "consider this your wake-up call. This company was built on the principle that everyone deserves respect, dignity, and equal treatment. If you can't live up to that standard, there are plenty of other places you can work." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the faces of the remaining staff. "But if you can commit to being part of the solution, to creating a workplace where everyone, regardless of race, background, or appearance, is treated with respect, then we have work to do together." The transformation was immediate and visible. Staff members who'd been whispering and laughing earlier now stood straighter, their expressions serious and attentive. The clients who'd witnessed the drama looked between amazed and impressed. "Dr. Williams," Darnell called to the screen, "I want you here in Dallas tomorrow to begin implementing the new training protocols. We're going to make this location a model for every other AmeriHome office in the country." "Already booking my flight," she replied. "This is exactly the kind of change we've needed to implement system-wide." Darnell smiled, and for the first time all day it reached his eyes. "Good, because we're just getting started." The emergency board meeting had lasted less than an hour, but in that time they'd fundamentally altered the trajectory of a billion-dollar company. More importantly, they'd sent a message that would ripple through the entire real estate industry. Discrimination wouldn't be tolerated, covered up, or explained away as standard procedure. It was time to build something better. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at AmeriHome Realty's Dallas showroom spread like wildfire through social media and industry publications. The hashtag AmeriHomeDallas became a rallying cry for accountability in corporate America, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination and celebrating the swift, decisive action taken by the company's leadership. But for Darnell Hayes, the real victory wasn't in the viral videos or the positive press coverage. It was in the phone call he received 3 weeks later from a young black real estate agent in Atlanta who told him she'd just sold her first $1 million property, and that seeing his story had given her the courage to pursue clients she'd previously thought were beyond her reach. It was in the email from a Latino couple in Phoenix who'd used AmeriHome's new minority home ownership fund to purchase their first house, escaping a cycle of rental increases that had trapped their family for generations. It was in the quarterly diversity report that showed a 300% increase in minority applications for sales positions across all AmeriHome locations, as word spread that this was a company that didn't just talk about inclusion, it enforced it. Standing in his corporate office 30 floors above downtown Dallas, Darnell reflected on the full circle his life had taken. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a faded business card, the same card that had been pressed into his young hand 16 years ago by the sales manager who'd rejected him. Maybe try somewhere more appropriate, the man had said with a condescending smile. That same showroom, that same corner office where Brad Thompson now sat, had been where Harold Clemson had looked at a young black graduate and seen nothing but risk. Clemson, who'd retired just last year with full honors and a company watch, never knowing that the young man he'd dismissed would one day own the entire company. The American dream, he'd learned, wasn't just about individual success. It was about using that success to tear down the barriers that prevented others from achieving their own dreams. It was about recognizing that true power wasn't the ability to exclude others, but the responsibility to include them. His assistant knocked on the door, reminding him of his next appointment, a meeting with the mayor's office about expanding the minority homeownership program citywide. Real change, Darnell had discovered, was like compound interest, small actions building upon each other until they created transformation that seemed impossible from the beginning. As he gathered his materials for the meeting, Darnell's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Williams. 6 months later, discrimination complaints at AmeriHome locations down 89%, employee satisfaction up 67%, customer diversity up 156%. The revolution is working. He smiled, slipping his father's watch into his pocket, alongside Harold Clemson's faded business card. 2 artifacts from different eras, representing how far he'd come and how far there was still to go. Remembering Tyler's smirk, Susan's condescension, Brad's casual racism, he realized they were just echoes of Clemson's rejection, proof that some things never changed unless someone forced them to change. Justice, Darnell had learned, wasn't about revenge, it was about transformation. It wasn't about punishing the past, but about building a future where such punishment became unnecessary. The real victory wasn't that he'd fired 3 discriminatory employees. It was that he'd created a system where such discrimination could no longer hide behind policy and procedure. It was that he'd turned one company's problem into an entire industry's awakening. Now, the question facing every leader in corporate America was simple. What will you do when discrimination happens in your organization? Will you explain it away, or will you eliminate it? For Darnell Hayes, the answer had always been clear. Power without purpose was just privilege. But power with purpose, that could change the world, one interaction at a time. The American dream was alive and well. It just needed more Americans willing to fight for it.